For those of you that are watching this video, it means that you probably were not in lab today or haven't been able to do the salt and sand lab, and as a result, you'll be doing this lab virtually. In order to do that, if you go over to our calendar, you will notice that there is a link on our calendar that says video of the lab. This is actually how you will do the lab. You will print this lab sheet, and then you will watch the video of the lab, which is actually Miss Call and I doing the lab actually today. Along the way, you'll be gathering the data as if you were in lab, and then you'll be analyzing it as well. So of course you'll need to print the lab sheet before you watch the video of the lab so that you have the opportunity to follow along and record data as you go. After having done this, the question then becomes, how do you analyze the data that you've collected? And that's what I would like to take a second and explain to you how to do. So in order to do that, what I'll do is I will actually make up a little bit of data just to give you a sense of how this goes. This will make more sense after you watch the video of the lab and get a sense of what we're actually doing. But once you're there, it'll be then time for you to analyze your data, and I'd like to show you how to do this. So when you are done with the lab, your data chart will be completely populated with data. And one of the things that you will have measured is the mass of a beaker. So we'll use easy numbers, and let's say that this beaker weighed 100 grams. It weighs much less than that, but for argument's sake, let's say that the beaker weighs 100 grams. Then you, in lab, you will see you place some salt in that, some salt in that beaker. So let's say, for example, after you place the salt in the beaker, the mass of the beaker goes up to 101.12 grams, the additional mass, of course, being the mass of the salt. Well, again, you'll fill out the rest of this data chart from having watched the video, but once you've collected all this data, the question then becomes, how do you do the calculations? I'd like to model for you then the first calculation in this setup. So we're finding the initial mass of the salt. This was the salt that you initially placed in the beaker. In order to do this calculation, the mass of the salt is actually the difference between the mass of the beaker with the salt and the mass empty. Now, it's important the way we represent this calculation, and it looks like this. We will take the mass of the beaker and the salt. From that, we will subtract the mass of the beaker, and this will then result in the mass of the salt. Notice how we've organized this in columns. It must be organized like this, and then what we'll do is we'll skip a little bit of space and we'll bring our numbers down. So the mass of the beaker with the salt is 101.12 grams. The mass of the beaker itself is 100 grams. And when we do this subtraction, we get 1.12 grams. So now we need to talk about how to round this number. Remember, when we deal with subtraction, we are concerned about decimal places. So there are 2 decimal places in our first measurement, there are 2 decimal places in our second measurement, and consequently we get 2 decimal places in our calculated mass, so we don't need to round. That's exactly where it needs to be. So stop here and go watch the video of the lab and collect the rest of your data. When you're done with that, you will then do the mass of the salt recovered, which is a calculation similar to the first one, which should make more sense when you're done watching the video. Then finally, you will calculate your percent error, and following all of this, you will then go to the back of the lab and you will answer these conclusion questions. All of this work should be done before your next class period. But what you'll see, whether you're in person or doing this online, what you'll see is when we get together for class next time, what we will do is we will actually go over these lab reports and we will edit them and perfect them, and then they will be finally due the next class period. So let's take a look at the calendar and let's make sure that all of that made sense. So once again, if you are in an A-Day class, then when I see you on September 3rd, we will be fine-tuning these labs and they will finally be due on the 8th. If you're in a B-Day class, we will be fine-tuning them on Friday the 4th, and then they will finally be due the 9th. Now, as you're working on these write-ups, because you've never done these before, we have provided an example of what they should look like. You see that link here, it says example. If you click on that link, this is actually a mock write-up of what this lab should look like, including the data and how to analyze it as if you were writing up the lab. So as you're working on this, this is a model of what you're shooting for, and I hope that you find that helpful. Understand that if your lab does not look like this, then you've made mistakes that you'll need to correct before you turn this in finally. So if you have questions, please get a hold of your teachers, and otherwise, please go and watch the video of us doing the lab. Let us know if you have questions. Thanks.